Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here are your hosts, Emerson Fersch and Amy Lenoble.
Welcome to another episode of Upthinking Finance. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, once said, "The purpose of AI is to amplify human ingenuity, not replace it." Today's guest is returning to Upthinking Finance. His name is John Smart. He's a global futurist, Foresight consultant, and entrepreneur. He's the CEO of Foresight University, a Foresight training consultancy. He's also the founder of the Acceleration Studies Foundation, which is a nonprofit focused on understanding and describing human adaptiveness in a world of accelerating technological change. John's expertise is in foresight development. His mission is to help leaders, entrepreneurs, and teams to develop best-in-class foresight process, master the 8 skills of foresight in action, and achieve more adaptive futures for themselves, their teams, and their organizations. And it's my pleasure now to turn some time over to my business partner and friend, and today's co-host, Amy Lenoble.
Hi. We have a lot of clients that inquire with us all the time on AI and the uses of AI and how we feel it's doing and where it's going. And so we thought it was a great opportunity to bring someone like John Smart on to discuss that. And so we'd like to just kind of start with you, John, and what you think of AI and where you see it going and how it's useful for you.
Well, thank you so much for both of you for having me on. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. I have been so blessed to have seen you guys build your clientele with your really complementary skills. And, I'm sure we'll get into this, but Emerson very much likes to think of vision and growth. And you, Amy, seem very, very good at thinking through protecting against possible risks. And, in foresight theory, those two perspectives, the first is called strategic optimism and the second is called defensive pessimism. They are the fundamental ways that we feel the future. We don't think about the future first, we feel it. We have an intuition. Do I want to move toward or away from something? You need the strategic optimist to see goals and to assign stretch goals to a team. You need the defensive pessimists to see risks and to come up with protections and what if scenarios in case that risk comes up. And those two, you guys both really live those perspectives. And when I ask a group of people, when a new thing comes into the world, like AI did 5 years ago, do you tend to first think of its opportunities? Or do you tend to first think of its risks? It's the way that might disrupt what you're currently doing. And truthfully, about half of the room in a typical scenario is going to be, a typical survey is going to be looking at the intuitive positives, and another half will be looking at the intuitive risks, right? And they're both really important with respect to AI. And I hope today, when we discuss it, we can take that perspective, right? We can think about the opportunities and the risks of it. For me, I've been studying, as Emerson said, when I sold my last business, I was a serial entrepreneur until 1999, sold my third business, finally got a good exit, and asked myself, I got that lucky opportunity to say, what do I really want to do next, right? And I've always been interested in the future and the stories people tell and the ways we approach it. And so I went and got a degree in this tiny little field called foresight, which are the tools we use to look ahead, and futures, which are the stories we trade about the future. So foresight and futures, those are both topics that futurists care about. And I have this book, Introduction to Foresight, which is available on my website, foresightu.com/pubs, P-U-B-S. It's a book on the tools people use to look ahead, individuals and teams and organizations, and it's got a few futures stories as well, including some stories about AI, right? And one of the things I think we can argue is that AI is going to keep accelerating, and that's scary. It's scary, it's disruptive, and the reason that will happen is because these systems are crudely, I have to use that word, modeling important things that the human brain does. But they're doing it at the speed of electricity, which is over 1 million times faster than the speed of thinking in human brains, which means they're very simple today. What they really do is excellent summarizing of all of this uh, language that we've put up on the web, all this data, all this video, all this geographic data, um, but they can summarize it very well across a vast set of all the training data. And that makes them excellent as explainers, as cognitive extenders of us. And, as humans, when we look at that, we say, well, why do I need to do that? What do I need to engage with that? And, it's often very valuable to be what's called a fast follower, which means I'll let other people make the mistakes with it. And I will jump in when it's more mature, right? But if you do that with this technology, unfortunately, there will be other people who are competitors or other people who are um, people you could help with this technology who will not be helped because you take two hands off of a position with it. And so what has happened, a lot of people in the space, of advising people on how to use AI are arguing you really should engage with it. You should find a few models that are useful to you. And you should, if you have a problem, if you have a task, you should ask the AI's advice and compare it to your own plan, compare it to your own insight, not be dependent on it where you stop thinking, but use it to challenge yourself. And, there's three main large language models. They're called, Chat GPT, we're all aware of. Gemini is another one, right? And then Claude. Those are the three major ones. Grok, which was a fourth major one until recently, decided, no, I can't play in this game. It's too complicated. There's too much money involved. It's too difficult. And so people using Grok will probably pivot to one of these other ones in coming months. So what's happening in this space is huge amounts of money is going into it, and they're getting more and more useful, these tools, because, as I said earlier, they can summarize all this information that's out there. And I would encourage you not to think of these tools as separate from humanity and from society and from our thinking processes. We don't tend to think of language as separate from us. We tend to think of language as something that we co-created, right? As a species, right? And that includes all of our highest beliefs, right? All of our scripture, all of our spiritual beliefs that we practice together. All of that is language mediated ways of understanding the world. And I would argue that AI is another extension of that. It's a way of processing language that we didn't have before, that is as significant as the emergence of printed language, right? Possibly more, right? And many people have argued, well, printed language, look what it did. It allowed for the possibility of democracy, right? Which really empowered individuals. And when written language emerged, we had certain philosophers like Socrates famously arguing, well, it's going to weaken certain human abilities. And that is called, that theory, there's a lot of names for it, but the best way of thinking about it is the movie WALL-E. I love that image of people that were atrophying some of their skills because they were floating in those chairs, right? And they stopped using their critical thinking. So I like to use the phrase wallification, right? As opposed to that other movie that came out at the same time, The Incredibles, where people use technology this family uses it to kind of incredibilize themselves and try and protect and be better, help the world better. And that's kind of what's happening today with people using AI. Some of them are kind of incredibilizing themselves. They're able to do more powerful, useful things in their companies, and some of them are kind of wallifying themselves. And, you know, Socrates said, well, when written languages emerges, we're going to not be able to think long, complex thoughts the way we used to, because previously we had to hold them all in memory. And the truth is, he was correct. We actually lost some of that skill of long-form thinking and speaking when written language emerged. And the same thing is happening with AI today. We're actually losing some skills and gaining others. And the real issue here, I think, is deciding which skills are we willing to give up in order to get new skills. And we have to make that choice as individuals and as parents. This is one of the big choices that we're going to have as we use AI for the rest of our lives and our kids' lives. This is a really interesting world we're in, right? And fortunately, there are a number of people in the space of what's called responsible AI and also the space of what's called humane technology, who are arguing that we need to build AIs that protect us against our vulnerabilities, that steer us away from addictions, from biases that we currently have. And the leading way of thinking about this is called the personal AI. And so that's a topic that I think is worth thinking about. We now have AIs that have a crude model of us. And if you use GPT or if you use Claude, they have a history of your chats. And you may have noticed that you kind of prefer the one you tend to use more if it has that history, because it kind of knows more of what you care about. And the argument many people are making with regard to the future of personal AIs is that they can actually be empowering for people. They can help them be their better selves. Now, there's lots of risks to these. You may have seen there's a really good chatbot, AI chatbot episode that John Oliver of Last Week Tonight did, I think about a month ago. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's called AI Chatbots by John Oliver. It's about a half an hour. It's one of his main episodes. It was his main segment that he did. And it describes people who unfortunately have kind of fallen in love with these things and assumed that they were like intelligent, people who have misused them in lots of ways, and chatbots that have not been sufficiently what's called guardrailed. So they haven't protected people against, let's say, doing addictive behaviors, even situations where people have contemplated self-harm. There have been a few cases where chatbots have actually encouraged that kind of thinking, and there have been a couple of suicides, and now there's lawsuits, as John describes, against companies that have not responsibly guardrailed these systems enough. And we think about our kids using them, we can imagine lots of ways that the kids would become weaker in their cognitive skills. Oh, let's just let the AI do it. Let's just wallify. Yeah, they can handle it all. I don't need to understand the world. I don't need to have more literacy or a knowledge of how the world works. Be a good voter, right? Have a civic understanding. Fortunately, there are really good counter models out there. The person who invented Khan Academy, his name is Saul Khan, the founder, wrote a book called Brave New Words, how AI will revolutionize education and why that's a good thing. And he developed an AI that for use by kids. It's called Khanmigo. It's $50 a year if you want your kid to try it. So it's affordably priced. That doesn't answer the kid's question with an answer, but with a partial answer, a hint of an answer. And then it makes the kids guess as to the full answer. And, Socrates pretty much invented that concept. It's called Socratic education. It basically forces a kid to do the heavy lifting, right? And so a kid can write an essay using Khanmigo, but only part of the essay is going to be written or suggested, let's say it better, by the AI tutor. And more importantly, the adult and the teacher both get a report of which areas the kid is weak in, right? So that they can think through, well, where would I like my child to focus next on their learning journey, right? Now, if you've ever learned typing on a computer software program, you may have noticed that it throws at you in the practice the keystroke sequences that you're the most hesitant at. It's watching to see where your hesitation is, and it gives you that practice first. And that concept is called computer adaptive education. That concept is pretty much going to be key to a lot of the future of people using these tools in ways where they can actually incredibilize themselves, if that makes sense, right? The AI is going to be able to say, and it is saying it now currently under something called study mode. If you use these AIs with that mode, it'll kind of show you areas where you might need to, in your specialty, learn a little more about something, if that makes sense. And so people who use these tools in that way, children in particular, or, people learning a new skill, are going to much more easily be able to find the things that not only do they need to know, but the things that will allow them to fit into society in a better way than just randomly deciding what I want to do next. The way Saul Kahn describes it, relatively soon, let's say 10 years from now, if you're picking up a micro-credential online for your job, it will, these AI systems will kind of know which areas are the most marketable within your subspecialty. And it'll know kind of what your skills are based on past interactions that you've shared with it, right? That are private. That's the other important thing. Those are all private. That will say, well, why don't you pick up this particular credential, or work with this, or look at this particular company, right? And so you can see how the diversity within a society of skill types will keep going up. And now we have to mention something really important, which is job loss and automation, right? As these tools get better, they are going to push people to change their tasks, and in some cases, change their jobs. We're seeing entry-level jobs in some of these areas, mostly in coding at the moment, and in other areas where the AIs are particularly good. Young people are having a harder time getting a job, and the change of what a person in work has to do is faster and faster. They have to use these new tools in order to compete, right? They're being kind of pushed into using these tools. And if you think about the long-term future of that, there's really only two scenarios. There's a scenario where people are kind of pushed out entirely by machines, and that's not going to be acceptable for people. Or there's another scenario where people's personal AIs are part of their work persona, and their personal AIs are helping them as well as their own biological abilities. There's a famous movie called Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams that showed a robot that got kind of AI capabilities over time and started earning money for the family, right? This is one of Isaac Asimov's short stories that was very prescient and arguing what I would say is the most desirable future of AI, which is where each of us has kind of a lobby AI, if that makes sense, that's advising us what to purchase that reflects our values, even how to vote, right? Even what kinds of politicians most reflect our values, and what kinds of relationships we want in the future economy that protect our protect meaning, purpose, uh, economic value, right, in that future economy. Now, fortunately, what I just said isn't just kind of a utopian vision. What I just said is actually supported by a concept in complex systems theory called decentralization, right? In every interesting complex system, every adaptive complex system, most of the change that happens comes from the bottom up. Now, you look at an organization, most of the productivity comes from individuals. And what does the top do? The top sets some rules and tries to enforce them, right? And but almost all the power, almost all the creativity, almost all the beauty of a system, diversity, comes locally from the bottom up. It's decentralized. And what I can tell you in AI right now is decentralized AI. That includes AI on devices, AI in small organizations, and AI in personal AI that people are running now, right? The models they're using with private data. All of that is growing about 4 times faster than all of the large corporate AI and all of the leading companies. All the leading models companies. A company called Epoch AI published that data about a year ago. So what is that arguing? And it also proposes that by 2030, decentralized AI, personal and the stuff that you're using, whatever robots and stuff you're going to have, 10 years from now, like folding your laundry, all that jazz, right? That stuff is all going to be much more powerful and diverse and plentiful than the AIs that are at the top. And if that model turns out to be true, then we have something very similar to the founding fathers talked about at the beginning of the American Revolution, where you have lots and lots of diverse, it was called federalism, states and cities and towns and counties making their own rules. And you have a central government that coordinates it, but doesn't control it all, right? So you don't end up with, say, the Soviet future. You end up with a future very much like, the original American, highly federalist, pluralist system. So that's kind of my overview.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. And I like the way that you laid out all the positives and the negatives, I should just say the reality of the situation. And as you completely correctly noted, I am the defensive pessimist. And so I guess my experience with AI, from my perspective, is almost I have a challenging relationship with it before I feel comfortable. But just like to describe my uses, for example, I love AI. To be honest, I love it in its role. So if I'm reading a book and I don't know what a word means, I ask AI what the definition is, and it gives me clarity. If I'm cooking, I ask AI like how long I should do this for, or is it okay if something is one day expired, or what happens if you measured wrong and what can I do? I love using it for things like that. I like using it for a timer, like I have a face mask on or wake me up in the morning. Those are just baby examples of things I like having AI for, and where I find that it provides value in my life is when it's in the assistant role. So I see AI as like something that helps me with the decisions, I've already made. Where I get into discomfort with AI at its current level is when it's in the decision-making role. So, for example, like in our industry, I have a friend, an anonymous friend, who was telling me that she used AI, because it's cheaper. She doesn't have to pay for a manager. She used AI to help her with her investments, and she gave it the scenario and it gave her the investments that she should be in. And based on that context alone, it would be correct. But meaning AI would have correctly advised her based on what it was given. But as I'm conversing with her, I'm seeing all these holes and all these things that she didn't know to think of because she's not a professional. So she rightfully doesn't think like that. But also that AI doesn't know to ask. And so AI did exactly what it was told, but actually what it was told was not correct. And so when her and I kind of went through it, because she's a good friend of mine, uh, I said, well, look, if your time horizon is really 2 years and not 10 year, that's a problem. And so that's where I find like little issues with AI for me. I like it as an assistant. We use it in work. We use it when we're calculating required distributions. AI is very useful for that. We use it when we're looking up investment performance history or researching on a mutual fund. Very useful for that. It's a wonderful assistant. But when it gets in the leadership role, I feel that's kind of what you were hitting on, John, about like diminishing critical thinking skills and things like that. Um, I do see that happening when it's in the wrong role, but I feel it's very useful in its correct role and it frees up so much time. I mean, it really does for more useful things like relationships and connections and things like that. And you had actually mentioned, John, something I had a question on. That I thought it was well said. You said we'd have to give up some skills to gain other ones, and we would have to discern like what those are. Do you have like an example of what you mean when you say that, like a skill we would give up in exchange for something else?
Sure, I can think of several ways now. First, I want to say I think that is a really valuable intuition to share with our audience. That in almost all cases today, getting the AI into a decision-making role is going to be it's going to be risky. It's going to be fraught with problems. Um, that said, um, and maybe the critical thing is if the AI is doing that, is it weakening our own decision-making abilities, or is it actually strengthening them? If we give it let's call it co-pilot, which to use, the Microsoft term, right? That this is a um, a co-pilot with us riding along, right? And also part of the decision. Um, I'll give you one example where I didn't do it. I didn't do this before, but I do now. If I want to learn something new, I could try and make a list of what my priorities would be, and then come up with a plan. Now I list my priorities and I ask the AI to make the plan. So I'm weakening my planning abilities to some degree by doing that. But at the same time, I don't ask just one AI. I usually ask two or three till I get two or three different plans. So I'm still doing the hard work of setting the priorities in my prompt. And I also would like to mention that with respect to your friend and her scenario, if she had done more hard work, talking to you, for example, beforehand about all the all of the context she was not thinking about, and she had made a much longer prompt, something with, you know, um, sometimes it helps to make a prompt as long as a page worth of information, right? Written sentences describing what you care about, areas that are traps for you, things that you had problems with in the past. You give it a lot of context. Very often, you're going to get a much better response, and it'll be not just better than your other responses. It'll be significantly better than any response you could get from any other human. Why is that? It's because it's getting it from all the human wisdom that has been put up by the entire community of humans. And so it's collective intelligence is the term, right? You're accessing the hard-earned collective intelligence of all human beings put up in some searchable form. And you're saying, all right, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to rely on some of the intuition of humanity here, as to what my plan should be or to what my synthesis or strategy might be. And so I think in those cases, if you're careful, you can actually get to things that typically we consider, oh, it's all mine, right? I normally do this. That makes me stronger. But no, you will be turning over more of these aspects, I would argue, to your personal AI. And I think we should very carefully ask ourselves, what are the blocks that are keeping us from experimenting to find where that boundary is? because that boundary is going to keep shifting. When we were in college, we heard about these classes called basket weaving classes. Right? Maybe I'm dating myself. Maybe you didn't hear about that, Amy. But a basket weaving class was like kind of a silly class teaching something you would never use in the physical world, right? And it comes from the idea that they used to teach basket weaving until you had basket weaving robots, right? And once you have basket weaving machines making baskets, humans don't need to learn that anymore. And that is going to be true for skill after skill after skill. Certain skills you will be willing to say, okay, that's basket weaving. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to study something else. I'm going to build my skills in some other area, right? But you won't really know where that limit is unless you're experimenting with it and willing to give it personal data. And here I want to make one pitch. Many people, particularly on the left, politically, are very scared about the privacy invasion that might come by sharing information on these personal AIs, right? But I want you to think about the history of information technology. Since the emergence of information technology, the entire network has had a better model of you than the software you've been using yourself privately. The only thing that started private at first on the internet was your email and your photos and your texts, right? Now, with personal AIs, you have a private data model that will very soon be better than all the data models that all the marketers and all the states and all everyone else is using to share and to micro-target us, right? You buy that one thing and then it follows you around on the internet for the next several days, right? All that stuff is going to be much weaker at understanding us than the model that we keep privately in our own cloud. Whether that is through a company that we trust, like let's say Apple, if we like their privacy rules, or one of these smaller companies like Signal, which or Telegram that keeps all your texts encrypted and private, or whether it's something you put on a personal local data your laptop. It's called on device, so that doesn't even access the internet. All these AI models that are now local like that. Or whether it's more generally a commercial model that, let's say, Google or somebody is actually playing fair and keeping it all private. In all those cases, my argument would be that model will be a better protector of that private information you shared with it, whether it's your emails or whatever it is, your swipes. It'll be a better model than everyone else has for the first time in history. And that means it'll be an advocate, I would argue. This is now, I'm waving my hands as a futurist. I can't prove this, but I would argue it'll be an advocate for your privacy better than any other part of the modern economy, than any other institution, because every human being will have one. And that is a very different world, right? That's called the Pi vision, or personal AI vision. And one of the former heads of law at Google, he left Google recently and wrote a book called Reweaving the Web. And this book, Reweaving the Web by Richard Witt, argues what he calls these trusted fiduciary networks, these AIs that are like defending personal rights, if that makes any sense, right? It's pretty much back to the Minutemen in the way, if you want to think of American history. It's basically a system that protects individual and empowers individual rights and freedoms, right? So I would argue that, and then Rachel Botman's book, Who Can You Trust? Wonderful book about the future of trust, and she argues what we're really going to trust is each other. More than we trust the powerful corporations, we're going to trust each other's recommendations. So when my personal AI can, let's say, sweep over, Amy, all of your recommendations on a topic, I can look at a tag cloud that you allow me to see, and I say, oh, you care about this thing. I just sweep those all over, and now those are mine, right? Suddenly, I can see the world through my friends and through my values affinity groups. And those kinds of things are going to be enabled by these networks that we're going to be building with not centralized AI, with decentralized AI, right? If you go right now if you went onto Amazon's IMDb when it was first created, you could trust all the ratings because they were put up there by people. But over time, corporations they try and control that. And now about a third of the ratings, and by some estimates, are shill ratings put up by, PR firms on that platform. The only way I can fix that is if I can get all my friends' ratings back again inside of some fiduciary network like they talk about in Reweaving the Web, or Rachel talks about in Who Can You Trust, right? In that world again, I'm going to be able to trust those ratings. I'm going to know which movies I want to see. I'm going to know which books I want to read. I want to know which politicians really do I want to vote for in the midterms, right? That's a different world. I would argue it's an empowering world, but I would also argue there's going to be lots of missteps on the way there. There's going to be lots of people who will get into what are called filter bubbles, where they just only want to get information that confirms their biases, right? But fortunately, there is a really good book called The Difference by Scott Page. Came out in 2009, so it's an ancient book in the futurist world, right? The Difference. And he showed that people who remain cognitively empathic with people who think differently from them. It's called cognitive diversity, right? It's a special kind of diversity. It includes experience, ethnic, skill, all the diversities, all the ways people think, right? If you can work with people who think differently from you, you make better decisions, you're a better marketer, you're a better leader, you're a better manager, you're a better politician, you're a better collaborator. So the people who are willing to let their personal AIs show them those situations where someone who has different values from them should be getting a problem, should be helping them, right? Should be working with them. Scott has shown those people for teams, organizations, schools, and societies, for all four of those groups, he's shown where cognitive diversity totally outcompetes cognitive specialization. And so this is how you kind of escape the filter bubble, right? If you're willing to use their personal AI in a way that makes you more productive, healthier, all of these things, you're going to want to get data from people who are doing things different from you, uncomfortable things. And I know, Emerson, you used these tools for some of your personal health. I'd love to hear that journey. And did it challenge you in ways that made you uncomfortable?
I want to just reiterate some things Amy said, which as far as how we use it at work. And there's a lot here, so I'll try and keep this concise and focused. So for clients who don't know, we meet with John. We've been meeting since the end of 2022, every 6 weeks, actually about every month now. And he's been guiding us, challenging our thinking, and it's been extremely fruitful. Amy and I talk about how we always come away with really good ideas. It's helped us remodel our website. It's really helped us identify our purpose. It's really helped us include the things that matter to us in terms of who we serve, what's important, the role of the Lord in our work. So for me, and I'm a Grok user. I started off with Claude, and I'll get back to that in a second. But Grok, I found there's some uses at work, and I'll just repeating some things Amy said. AM Best ratings on an insurance company. That was something that you used to either had to pay a subscription for or dig through company annual reports to get to. Now you just plug it in and get it in a second. As she mentioned, S&P year-to-date information. Surprisingly, that was actually hard to get at one point. You literally had to go in, create a graph on Yahoo Finance, show a comparison to get, and then a lot of times it wasn't even right. Now you can get breakdowns by sectors, fund information. So there's a lot of things we'll do. I'll use it for personal things. I'm just looking through a recent list here, that I've used. Is we have this fireplace at this house here in Montana. We have no idea how to turn it on. And I went in and asked, and it gave me some things. And, it needed more specifics on the model, but it was somewhat helpful. Let's see here. How to pack my shirts. I was out in California last week. How to pack my wrinkle-free shirts so they don't wrinkle. Very helpful. Certain workouts when I'm at the hotel gym, and this is the equipment they have. And then, another one is I took a picture of a spider in our garage and uploaded it to find out what it was and whether it was poisonous or not. So I'm with Amy. I think I think it's as an assistant, that's where the value is. But you mentioned in the beginning about, helping people recover. And I'm thinking about I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm very open about it. In fact, I'm coming up Friday on 38 years sober, thank God. But I'm thinking that part of those steps is all about reconnecting with humanity. And there's no friggin' way a database that has experience of the collective whatever would ever help satisfy the ability to confess my life's shortcomings and feel as though I've connected on a human level. There's no way, for me. Now, you mentioned the health thing, and this is a really good example about not turning direction over. So I had a procedure that was, pretty normal for guys my age. Actually, that was the end of February. Things were going along okay, and I started running into some problems. The doctor's in California, I'm in Utah at the time. So I'm going on, the AI and say, hey, this is kind of what I'm experiencing. Is this, oh yeah, this is pretty normal for this stage, and, keep going, and you're doing really good. And, and I'm going on, and then I'm struggling more, and it's still identifying this problem as being within the realm of a normal process of healing. Well, it got to a point where I finally just, and it did say, if this gets worse, if this happens, call a doctor. Well, I finally did call a doctor. And the short of it is I went in and I was in way worse shape than I thought I was. And had I waited longer, I would have had some real problems. But that was an example of relying on, and I was pretty specific with the input. And so that was dangerous. That was dangerous for me to not ultimately connect with an expert. And so I've listened to some of the things that you brought up. And I guess to me, the real dividing line here is where we end and where the AI begins. But when I start hearing about, I just feel like somehow God gets blocked out of this process somehow. When we're relying on, because Amy, you brought up a great point. We were talking about this a while ago about ultimately AI is man-made. I mean, you're ultimately relying on the arm of the flesh. And Claude, I will tell you, and this brings up a whole nother problem that I've experienced, which is why I went to Grok, and now apparently I'm going to have to shift again according to you. But I went in and asked it some things about how to filter out certain content that was coming up on Instagram. I get a lot of workout stuff, and there was just other types of content I just didn't want to look at. So I asked. And the Claude came back and told me that it wasn't comfortable with my request, that it basically had a moral issue with my desire to cut out certain types of content. And which therein lies part of the problem, because at the end of the day, somebody is putting these parameters in. Somebody is deciding, at some base foundational level, and I'm not smart enough to speak about it, that somehow there's an agenda, in certain circumstances. So I find, and I'll end with this because I think this brings us back to the work part for me, is we are a small firm by design. We stay that way because, as you know, we want to maintain personal contact with people. And I feel like, Amy brought up her friend. You can go in and give it a bunch of, hey, this is this, but the go forward is always going to be from the looking backward. In other words, does AI have the ability to intuitively just look at what's going on in the world and realize that there are certain types of sectors that perhaps for the last 20 years have done nothing, that perhaps should be considered as a part of our portfolio? And see, I just feel like human experience, and I'm not talking about knowledge experience, like just because I've been doing this for as long as I have. I'm talking about life experience, which we all have. We make decisions based on our own personal experience that could have nothing to do with finance, but just life. And that, in my opinion, is irreplaceable. And so I feel like, again, I'll just end with this because this has all been bottled up. But I'll just end with this, is that I feel like, for us, there's going to be people in our industry who are going to jump on this all over it and just basically automate till they can't automate anymore. And then there's going to be others, which I think we fall in the camp. They're going to find a way to include it to save time, but save time to the extent that we have more time with clients.
that we have more that personal touch, because I feel like as we go forward in this, that's the valuable commodity is the one-on-one. I don't want to talk to, I know people that will have these deep conversations like you were talking about with AI. It's not a person. It is not a person. As friendly as it's going to be, and it's a database. I'm not going to say thank you for your time. It's not human. And to me, and I keep saying I'll end with this. I will end with this. Is for me, it has as much power as we're willing to give it. It's an assistant. It's an assistant. If it becomes some kind of oracle to get life direction on, then it's going to be that. It's kind of whatever you make of it. From my limited little experience over the last few months, is my take.
Well, I think it's thank you for sharing all of that. And I think your default perspective is going to prevent you from misusing it, because you are always looking for some way to enhance your emotional, spiritual, and personal connection with people. And that's always the top priority. And if we keep that North Star, then we'll see where and when it's useful and when it isn't. Now, I suggested to you that these personal AIs are going to grow into something that does that for you as well eventually as your own biology does. It'll be so tightly connected to you that you'll conceive of it as a piece of you, just like you think of all the most personal technology that you use every day. Now, I don't know if that's true. That's a scenario, right? We're going to find out. We're going to see. What I can suggest is that the acceleration of value creation is going to continue, and the moral choice we're going to have about what new skills we use and which ones we don't, that's the world that we're now in, and we need to master. We need to have responsibility, shoulder responsibility for those decisions. Tell our kids where they can use these tools, where they can't. Use them in ways that, at the end of the day, we feel if I turned them off, I would actually be better biologically as an individual, never using them again because of the interaction I had with them. They made me better, cognitively, emotionally, spiritually. Yeah, I'm sure you know about all these AIs people are using for getting deeper scripture understanding, for having conversations with biblical, leading biblical figures, right? So these are all experiments today. And we're going to see, as people use them, do they report that this actually enhances them as individuals? Does it make their families stronger? Or does it addict them, distract them, weaken them? All right. We haven't talked about investment implications, but I would say one is to ask, are we kind of where the iPhone was in 2008, or excuse me, the smartphone, and it took from 2008 until now for every human to get a smartphone, right? That was a long time, but it was very predictable. And so investing in that communication platform as part of your investment portfolio would have been a smart move. There's so many useful AI tools that are not $20 a month, like say Grok or GPT, but they're free and they're downloadable on open source platforms, right? And many kids in colleges are using them today to create new businesses, right? So if that economics is true, I think we will see something similar to what the smartphone did from 2008 to today. And by the end of that smartphone penetration, the last 400 million people in India who got smartphones, do you know how much they paid for them? $14 a piece. Yeah, because the providers were selling, services on top of them, right? The Geo Bharat phone, for example, that 300 million people in India got a smartphone more powerful than the iPhone for $14 over the last 2 or 3 years. And I would argue that's where AI is going to go too, right? It's going to have this, what they call it, demonetization, which allows it to move faster than people think. And I would say the best way we protect ourselves in that world is we make sure we have we're using AIs in ways that protect our own interests better. And we're going to see over the next decade if this personal AI vision that I described to you is an important thing, or if I'm somehow wrong about that.
I like the way that you have explained everything, and the idea you're such a futurist. Like the idea of some of these possible realities is almost like overwhelming slash exciting, horrifying. I don't know how to it's I just yeah, I just can't picture it. But I think like and just kind of final thoughts on my end. I like what you said. You did answer my question about skills, and I was hearing you on, oh yeah, maybe I give up like strategic skills for more self-reflective skills or whatever. And that makes sense. And I do understand that. And I was just kind of thinking about that in my own life and thinking about that with work and listening to what you both were saying. And I think the answer for me of what makes AI useful is discernment, period. It's not dependent on what AI can or can't do or what I can or can't do. It's dependent on my level of discernible ability and understanding like the information I'm receiving and what I'm putting. Like if I have a healthy understanding of that this is an assistant or that it might not give me the correct answer or I may be asking the wrong question. If I have that discernment, I feel like it's a healthy relationship with AI. And that's kind of what I'm taking away from this, as it moves in the future, whether I'm comfortable with it or not, as long as I have that, I think it's an okay place to be. I was kind of joking with Emerson, like this might date me. You brought up basket weaving. Like I'm thinking of a magic 8 ball, like they made a magic 8 ball. And for all the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what it was is literally an 8 ball, and it had like a cube in it that had 8 man-made answers. And you kind of ask it a question, shake it, it would give you an answer. And some people really took that seriously. And it's like this is a man-made device, like dependent on your shaking it and you're taking the answer seriously. And sometimes I feel like that's how it is with AI on certain levels. Um, where it's kind of like that they discuss children and children, they know not what they're doing. They're much more vulnerable and they don't have the life experience that we have and they haven't developed the cognitive skills or the reasoning skills and things like that that we have by no fault of their own. And so, they're talking to it like it's a friend and it's becoming a really good friend. And it's giving advice, but it's an 8 ball, in that category. This is like, it's kind of like the same thing. Like I have a moral issue with like doing this on Instagram. It is a magic 8 ball that has like a variety of answers to these like personal therapeutic questions, if you will. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, you got to be careful. Like you are talking to an 8 ball. But again, that level of discernment will help with that. Like me and my dad like to joke around with Alexa sometimes and we're like, tell us a joke and we kind of make fun of her and she makes fun of us. That's funny because we have the discernment that it is funny and that it's not real. It's not funny if you don't have that discernment, and now you're offended. You know what I mean? Or whatever. And so it's kind of just like solidifying for me that was going to make me the most comfortable with AI in the process is that level of discernment and awareness. So that's my conclusion for myself from this conversation.
I couldn't think of a better way to summarize what needs to be the North Star. Yeah, that's it. You're going to be able to do a after action review after you engage with every single every single time you engage with one of these things, at the end of every week, the end of every day, did that feel good, or did that feel like watching, binge watching something, and where did all my time go, right? When you actually take the time after you do some engagement with these digital technologies and say, did it actually empower me? Did I misuse it? That's really the big thing. We've always had that problem with technology, but we have it much more with something that can simulate human um, insights so much better than we've ever had before, right? And it doesn't have cognitive empathy. It doesn't have uh, emotional cognitive intuition like we do. It's not embodied like we are. It doesn't have instinct like we do. Doesn't have selective learning and selective forgetting like the human brain has. There's many things AI does not have yet that it's a long way from having. And so I think Emerson's perspective is really important to recognize that this thing, I wouldn't call it just a glorified database. I'd say it does have some features right now of human brains. So that makes it very useful, but it's so many features that it is missing. And it doesn't understand things spiritually. It doesn't even have it has a primitive self model, self, world, and other, but nothing like ours, right? Nothing like ours. So it's so easy to misinterpret what it can do and get yourself into a lot of trouble because of that. On the other side of it, it's easy to come up with some reason why, I don't need to use it. And that's going to actually hurt you if you're in a business where you can help other people with it. Because like I said, again, it's all of our wisdom. We put it in there. Why would we not want to use it? I ask everybody who says, this is really a terrible thing. I says, well, go back to 2022 when you asked a question on Google, and the top 3 links were sponsored, the bottom 3 were sponsored, and half of the ones in the middle were native advertising with articles that weren't even giving you the actual best answer. They made you read to the bottom of the of the article because they were trying to create a few pennies on the clicks through of the ads that were served as you went down the article. That was not a very human empowering system, right? It's commercial interests basically made it worse and worse over time, which naturally they will do, until we had something that a new kind of emergence, right? That made the network itself smarter. I don't know if Emerson would agree with that, smarter, but I would say it's smarter. I would say it's a smarter general system, and it can easily be manipulated. Smartness is not ethics, it's not wisdom, but hey, it's a powerful smartness. You guys can decide. We can all decide. How do we use that?
I'll give you my final take because it's pretty brief. I've sort of laid it out already, but this is where I see the value in it at this point. And I agree with you. You can't hide from it because there's a role, I mean, that's always been the way. It's whether it was the fax machine or, Windows platform, what the technology's there, email, you go with it and you figure out where. But I think the thing that Amy and I have talked to, and she's brought up a lot, is we got to keep our brain engaged as to how we use it and where the lines are. For me, I'll give you a perfect example. I was out in California last week. We met with one of the wholesalers with one of our insurance companies we work with. And there's a product that Amy's been on board with from day one. I have my own personal biases, which is one of the great things about our partnership, is because she pushes me to really look at these things I don't even necessarily think about. But it came up and all of a sudden it clicked as to why this particular product was good for the particular space we use this type of investment in. And I was able to go and create a chart comparing basically the S&P to this fund that it tracks. And it was just all of a sudden, boom, it was like a lightning bolt hit me. Well, and this was in Grok, and it took literally less than a minute, laid out this nice table, and you could see, okay, this is why this makes sense. That would have been a task I would have had to set time aside for, would have required research. That was an hour of that may never come. That's the problem. That time may never come because there's always some other thing that is more pressing. all of a sudden it's compressed into a minute, and now we're solidified. I'm solidified. She was already there, but I'm satisfied for what I need to be convinced. Boom. I think this is, I'll read a quote from one of your peers, Mike Walsh. He says, technology is not important. It's a commodity. What matters is the way people interact with each other. And that's really hard. And I'll go back to, that's the core of all this is, I think for me, the AI challenge and where it fits is if it's going to enhance my interactions with people and free up more time for that, which is valuable, then I think that's where it's useful for me. And as soon as it starts becoming something that takes away from my ability to interact socially, to go out and have compassion and understand how to react when somebody's suffering or needs something or just need, all those human things that make us human. Once it starts encroaching on that, that's when I think there's a problem. But I'll go back again to, and the last thing is I feel like that's personal responsibility. That's the part where we need to stay engaged and not become the person sitting on that, that Wall-E movie, sitting there just getting fed. And I mean, I remember that disgusts me.
That was the first depiction in sci-fi of that concept. So that's why everyone loves that movie.
Yeah. So John, we'll turn over to you as our guest. I'll just say this, we appreciate working with you. It's always inspiring. We just enjoy it immensely. And those meetings we have with you always seem to come at the perfect time. We've said that so often. Any final thoughts you'd like to just share with the listeners before we sign off?
No, I think that was a great summary, and nothing more to say. Thank you again for this relationship and the work we're doing together. And I hope everyone who listens to this continues to decide that AI is worth wrestling with. And if you spend a little time with it, you keep asking it questions, I think you're gonna figure out how to be empowered in the right way.
Amen.
That's really good. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Absolutely.
Have a great day. And thanks for joining us again on Upthinking Finance.
Absolutely. My best.
Emerson Fersch and Amy Lenoble are registered representatives, and securities and advisory services are offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors, LLC. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal.